Welcome to the Indigenous Approach, a podcast where we examine the role of the nation's premier partnership force across the competition continuum, from cooperation to conflict and everything in between. In this episode, 7 sergeants major from across the Special Forces Regiment continue the discussion about SF identity and focus on the ways to address the issue. Welcome to this episode of the Indigenous Approach. I'm Jacob Brayman, and I have the pleasure of being your host for today's episode. This is the final episode in our 3-part series discussing the Special Forces identity. We have discussed what is the SF identity, what is the SF identity crisis, how this will affect the force, and we are finally going to discuss what steps are needed to address the issue. I have the pleasure of welcoming the esteemed group of Sergeants Major from across the SF Regiment here with me today. We have Sergeant Major Dave Friedberg, the Alpha Company 4th Battalion 1st Special Forces Group Sergeant Major.
Glad to be back, Jake. Third time's a charm. And I do own more than one shirt, by the way.
Command Sergeant Major retired Jeffrey Wright. Jeff served in 3 different Special Forces groups and as a senior enlisted leader for 4 Joint Commands and has done many things within the Special Forces community since then.
Thanks. I appreciate being back, Jake.
Sergeant Major Matt Williams, the 2nd Battalion 3rd Special Forces Group Operations Sergeant Major, Medal of Honor recipient, and joined under the 18 X-ray program in 2005.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Glad to be back and hope we can kind of wrap this up for everybody.
Command Sergeant Major retired Bill Thetford, the USASOC Operations Integrator. Bill joined Special Forces in 1993 and retired in March of 2019. He has a lot of experience from CENTCOM and SOCOM.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Good to be back with you and the rest of the panel.
Command Sergeant Major Dave Waldo, the Command Sergeant Major of 4th Battalion 1st Special Warfare Training Group. He joined Special Forces in 2001 and started his SF career in 1st Special Forces Group. He now works to mold the new ones.
Yeah, thanks, Jake. Looking forward to crushing this 3rd episode.
Command Sergeant Major retired Terry Peters. He entered the Army as an infantryman in 1983 and retired as the 3rd Special Forces Group Command Sergeant Major after 27 years in the Army. Since retiring, he continues to do a lot of work with different charities and Special Forces veterans and their families, and he currently serves as the Honorary Command Sergeant Major of the regiment.
Thanks, Jacob. Great to be back with everybody for this 3rd iteration.
And Command Sergeant Major retired Tom Smith. He's been the man with all the education and insight with over 35 years in Special Forces, starting in 1977. He's taught over at SWCC with the SEER and the SF Pipeline. He served as the U.S. SOCOM Command Sergeant Major for over 5 years, and while there, he created the Joint Special Operations Forces Senior Enlisted Academy.
Thank you very much, Jacob. Pleasure to be here.
Thank you for being here, sir. Much of the questions surrounding the Special Forces identity came from a study conducted by the 1st Special Forces Command Chief of Staff, COL Ed Croot. He used different surveys and studies to determine what the force felt was the Special Forces identity. After all that research and tabulation of all the data, the findings pointed that there was an identity crisis. There are links to the paper and a few other discussions on the topic in the show notes. With that being said, gentlemen, our first episode focused on there being an identity crisis. The conclusion there is one, but it's not necessarily a bad thing. Our last episode focused on the SF identity crisis and how it affects the force. Today, we are going to go after the biggest topic of discussion. How are we going to address the issue?
All right, Jake, I'll take that question for action. So I think the first couple of podcasts, we had some really, really spirited, interesting dialogue and sort of came to a consensus that there is something we got to figure out, identity crisis or otherwise. Having just completed our company's command and control validation exercise or CV2 pathway, I think we break it down to its most simplest form. We take the missions that our units are assigned, we come up with the training guidance, and then we train our units to accomplish our assigned missions, period. End of story. There's going to be shoot, move, communicate, and medicate inherent in that. There's going to be language inherent in that, even though that's not a met, which I think should change. And there's going to be all those things that people have come to expect from Green Berets. But I think we should decentralize the training down to the company level. And as long as we have the forces that are manned, trained, and equipped to accomplish our assigned missions from the TSOCs, then we'll be good. And if people are going grid north instead of magnetic north, and it looks like they're training themselves to the war they want, not the war they have, then that's up to the battalion and the group leadership to stop it. I don't think we need any more words and arrows. I don't think we need any more words and arrows. I don't think we need any more references to the NDS. I think everyone understands what the new threat is, and we just power it down to the companies and let the senior NCOs and team sergeants take charge of the training.
Yeah, great stuff as always, Dave. I think from us, I think the first thing that we have to do is believe in the vision and believe in what it means to be the nation's experts in the Indigenous approach and all the nuance that goes into the sporting or defeating the resistance movements. You know, vision is like an azimuth in land navigation. At the end of the day, when you have a firm belief in that and confidence in the azimuth, you can concentrate on the task at hand, whether it's getting out through the draw, the swamps, or getting through the wait-a-minute vines. Because ultimately you trust your equipment, you trust your compass, and you trust the process that determine that azimuth. From our perspective here at the battalion, at the Q course, and we're talking about 18 X-rays directly off the bus from basic airborne school and in-service recruits just post-selection, getting ready to embark on their journey through the qualification course. We set the conditions that we expect that their generation of Green Berets will eventually be better than all of us ever were. And we were pretty damn good. And they will be compassionate, and they'll be brilliant, and they will be lethal so they can fight and win on their toughest day of ground combat. That's the identity that we have here. It's predicated on that vision provided by the senior leaders. When I went through the pipeline in 2000, the cadre like Pappy and Mr. Tabata, they didn't teach us how to win the global war on terrorism, but they sure as hell provided the foundation to do so. You know, they taught us how to think. They just help us discern instinct and impulse. And they also provided the foundation and just a very competent in our MOS tasks. It's essential to advising and assisting and then accompanying Indigenous forces. So that's what we're doing here about the identity crisis. We're instilling a faith and belief in the broad expectations of the Green Beret, which is a symbol of excellence, a badge of courage, and a marked distinction to fight for freedom. We absolutely have an unyielding faith in the vision. We believe it's a strong one. We understand the Indigenous approach, and we're weaving it into every aspect of the qualification course. And that's exactly how it's supposed to be.
You know, I think there's a few key points that have to be looked at when you're talking about kind of how do we address this identity crisis. And the main few are, you know, your leadership development is crucial. And then along with that is training education, you know, how you train, how you educate your force as to what it is they're supposed to be doing. And then along with that, it goes into your leadership engagement, right? As long as you have engaged, focused leadership that are perpetuating the vision, as Dave just pointed out, and focusing your guys on the strategic goals that are specific to your unit, to your AOR, then I think we can have success. And really all we are doing now is dealing with a strategic mission shift as opposed to, you know, an overarching crisis. One thing that really will assist in that is as we draw down, as we make that, you know, that big, large ship movement shift and mission, the groups focus on their AOR and become AOR oriented, AOR specific. And that's where the training education comes into play. And that embedded focus and relationship building and constant contact with their AOR really can kind of address what is considered to be this crisis, right? Because now we have, you know, we have an embedded interest in our mission. You know, we have consistent relationships, the ability to engage with the same people and continue to create, you know, everlasting relationships, which in turn, you know, create our ability to have a long-term strategic focused mission set and success in our operations.
I think Matt brings up some really good points about leadership and setting priorities and messaging. And if you kind of look at what General Brennan and his CSM Ted Munter have recently done with, you know, releasing the new command vision and the command video that kind of talk about, you know, where the Special Forces Regiment is going to go, you know, in the future. And especially when you look at the command vision and you read the latter part where it has a great power competition scenario. It kind of goes through where the complementary efforts of civil affairs, PSYOPs, and special forces can work together, you know, complement one another to achieve a common goal. And so I think if you look at what has to happen, I think it's leadership at all levels, and it starts at the top with General Brennan and CSM Munter, and I think they're doing that now with their vision and video. The command video really sets a good azimuth for where where the regiment ought to go in the future.
Hey, I will just mention, from me, from a personal vignette, the first battalion commander that I walked into his battalion as a new guy out of the Q course was known very, very well as being, someone that supported his organization being able to speak 5.56 and 7.62 as his language. And if you didn't understand, he would just speak it a little bit louder so that you did catch up on it. Immediately following that, the next battalion commander was someone who was very much oriented on language, and to the point where language lab was something that had to be added to the weekly training schedule. So those kinds of shifts, if you will, aren't consistent. And so when we look at some ways in which we're going to get after the identity crisis, I think it has to be tied to the implementation of a consistent long-term vision for the command. One, I think that enables the organizations to develop, train, sustain an SF capability that focuses on a core set of competencies that are capable of innovating and evolving as the conditions on the ground change. We've got to be able to take advantage of some of the changes in technology as they go along, and then also potentially change some of the policies that hinder us accomplishing our mission. I think the vision has got to be consistent with building soldiers of courage and maintaining sound character. The command has got the staff capability, or has a staff capability to support the innovation and evolution process. And it's got to promulgate and resource the vision. From my experience, meaningful innovation comes from the bottom, and we've got to be prepared to hear what is coming out, from the ODAs, from the company level, as far as, hey, how do we innovate when we get into these different environments? I also think that meaningful change is usually driven from the top. And the reason I say that is because the top is who controls all of the resources pretty much to make all these changes happen. And so even if it's a recognition of change needs to come from the bottom, it still has to be driven from the top to make sure that the change is tied in and resourced appropriately. And I think lastly, we've got to understand our role. And I think this comes from communication of that vision, both up and out to people outside our community, and then down and in to folks within our community. But we need to understand our role. We need to understand the operational environment that we operate in, and we have to be able to articulate our purpose. I mean, so many times we've gone into different TSOCs to do different things with country teams, and we've lacked the ability to really articulate, what our purpose is in that country, and that has had some negative impacts. Some of the TSOCs I've been associated with. And then lastly, I think it's just we've got to empower people to understand the importance behind building relationships with your partner, with people in the gym environment, and then those folks that are tied to the levers that pull some of the action of the elements of national power, especially as it applies to the GPC.
Yeah, it's Terry. Hey, I'd like to reiterate what Matt, Bill, and Jeff have said with respect to the criticality of leadership, and this, what I'm seeing a lot of is SF Command's vision and all of those right steps that are going on there. My hope and belief is that both the Special Operations Center of Excellence and Special Forces Command are embarking on a supporting relationship that's really going to allow those two critical organizations to work cohesively together, as we've seen in the past, and also just really work to eliminate any gaps there. I think that that strategic leadership can't be isolated in any single headquarters. It has to be kind of ever present and focused. That vision's between those two entities, as well as aligned with the 3-star command. I think it's got to be extremely important. And then when it comes to actually addressing, where do you begin and how do you continue to make these things work? I really like what's been said today about what's happening at the Special Warfare Center and School, and really as we're receiving folks and inculcating the right mindset. I'm also mindful that we have a lot of other touch points where we can continue to reinforce and really continue to shape and develop the force our professional military education is second to none, and our NCOES models are extraordinary. And I think when we can leverage those completely to really continue to communicate and educate, then we power down and really decentralize execution down to the ODA, and ODB level. And I think that's the magic of where the solution set lies in my mind. But it really, I think as we talk about leadership, that communication piece and alignment, most critical in really getting to working through this phase we're in right now and moving to the future.
Yeah, I'll chime in here also. Colonel Ed Croot talked in his paper about the 3 commands that span the making of a special forces guy and the utilization of a special forces guy. He talked about the recruiting command, he talked about the training command, and he talked about the operational command. Okay, and he saw a disconnect between the 3. So Jeff, I believe you were the one who brought it up, that seeing advertisements on how we recruit for people. So you see this, you say, wow, I want to be just like that. That's what I want to do. So you volunteer. The recruiting part is now done. Now you get a guy coming to the Q course that wants to do what he signed up to do. And it's not what he's going to do. He does something, in fact, very, very different. And then when he gets to then he graduates, then he gets to his organization, and then the guy walks in there saying, okay, this is what we're going to be doing. And well, no, that's not what we're going to be doing. We're going to be doing something different. And that lends itself to a lot of confusion and what Ed Croot was getting after. And so I personally think that how we need to address this is at all 3 levels. We have to fix the recruiting piece. We have to fix the training piece, and we have to fix the operational level and get them all consistently on the same sheet of music to understand what special forces is. Okay, why do we even exist? The whole all the way through, how are we being utilized? There has to be a consistent message at all levels of special operations, whether it be the first guy walking into your ODA for the very first time, or all the way up to the 3-star in charge of USOC, or even the 4-star here at SOCOM. They have to have an understanding of that. So, I came across this book right here. It's a history. A USOC, I think the USOC did this about in the 1990s somewhere, the story of Army Special Operations Command. And I read through the entire thing just the other day again. And it goes into great detail of each of the tribes within special operations, or USOC. Okay. And it's actually very, very good. And I think they ought to redo this and come up with a new one and pass that around throughout all of USOC, all the SF, to include CA, PSYOP, 160th, the Rangers, everybody, 528, all of them. And I think we need to get on a consistent basis. And I think something like this would be very, very helpful over a long time. It needs to be like a Bible, okay? And it should be updated every so often to add in the new history that's been added. Like nothing in here about 9/11 and there beyond, because it was written before that. But look at all the history that we've now gained over time. It ought to be included in there. I think there should, during the Q course, every phase, I think there ought to be blocks of instruction, education on the utilization of special forces. Why were they created? To do what? When did they ever do that? Okay. It's actually quite rare, but you never ever can afford to give up that capability. It's almost like nukes. You're not going to use nukes very often, but you cannot afford getting rid of them. Okay. Because you may end up having to fall back on that capability. So, and if you got rid of special forces, you don't have an unconventional warfare capability in the United States Army. You just don't. There is no other force that's trained, organized, and equipped to go infiltrate deep behind enemy lines and do that. So I think guys need to have a clear understanding of that. Other classes, okay? So let's look at special forces utilization in counterinsurgency and then instability operations. Look at the manuals. Look at what's written in the manuals and so forth. Understand our history and how did we get utilized to do these different mission sets. Foreign internal defense. Put out examples of how special forces was utilized in there. Jim Collins writes a book, Built to Last. And in that book, he talks about core purpose and so forth. But the big thing that he talks about is, sorry, I'm looking for something here. Maintain the core, preserve the core, but stimulate progress. Okay, and what he's basically saying there is great corporations out there that understand exactly who and what they are will always preserve their core. They will never deviate from it. And if they do, it's only very, very minor, okay? But stimulate progress, they change all the time. They adapt and stuff like that. And that just like special forces. Preserve the core, our unconventional warfare capability, but stimulate progress. Look at the world and see how your skill sets can be applied to the problems that are facing our nation. And then be able to just rattle it off. Okay, this is what we can do here. Over this, in this country, we can do that. In this theater, we need to be focusing on this and so forth. And I think that needs to be instilled in the Q course. With every phase, there ought to be blocks of education to educate our force on special forces, our history, our utilization, and where we ought to be looking at going in the future. Okay. And then when it comes to the force, I think that the force, sergeant right there with the sergeant majors that are out there, you have got to sit there and instill into the force that consistent message. Our guys should not be walking around thinking that they're doing FID when they're not. They're doing counterinsurgency. When they're not, they're doing stability ops. No, you're not. You're doing UW or whatever. And everybody's got sort of a different message. And we've got to fix that, because I think it reflects on the credibility of the force overall. And I think we need to professionalize ourselves. And listen, I am not picking on the force or saying that the force is bad, because I think special forces is the most awesome force that's ever been created in the United States military. Okay, anywhere, any service. I think if ever there was a force that has been designed to work in the gray area, it's special forces. Okay, there is no black, there is no white, there is no pure answers. You are constantly working in the gray, and they have been doing magnificently. Okay, it just comes down to that educational piece of understanding all the different mission sets that are out there, and when do we do it, and when don't we do it, when are we doing whatever, and so forth. And I think, therefore, I think those all three areas, recruiting, training, and utilization, needs to get into sync and be very, very consistent on the same sheet of music. Thanks.
Outstanding, gentlemen. I really do appreciate all the discussion on this. The one big area I wanted to focus on is, where exactly should this start? Should it start at recruiting? Should it start in the schoolhouse? Should it start once the people get to the teams? Where exactly should these things start being implemented?
Jake, I think it needs to start everywhere. If we're talking about a categorical shift in mission and mentality, it's like those control rods that go into calm a nuclear reactor, not the one they use in Chernobyl that had the fake graphite, not the boron, and it kills everybody, but it needs to go everywhere. I'm going to pile on the C word. The consistency thing, I think, is critical. And I use the word critical, knowing what critical means. The best advice I got before being a sergeant major is I need to be calm, calculated, and consistent. And I think the consistency is the thing that's going to be key. So whether it's at Thor, whether it's in recruiting, whether it's at BLC, SLC, or MLC, the first 45 minutes, maybe there's some utilization in there, but the first 45 minutes is, welcome to the Senior Leaders Course. This is what we're doing, and this is how it helps 1st Special Forces Command get after great power competition. We need to tie it no more than, I don't want to do 3-4 levels up, but at least up to the group and at least up to the TSOC, so that people are reminded that what they're getting trained on has the same effect and the same end state as where they're coming from and where they're going. And I also think we need to include the enablers in that, because our 35 series and our 92 series and our 42 series, they're going to have a shift in the nature of their support to the force. If they're going to be trading in their helmets for boonie caps, or they're not going to be pulling BDOC security, those folks, our supply trains, all the critical stuff that tends to fall by the wayside when we categorically shift our doctrine, they need to be included in this change as well. Because if they think that they're going to go to a special forces group and they're going to get their CT on, and it turns out that's not what they're doing, they need to be included in this. I would also say the way we metricize this is through the resources. How much O&M is being spent on learning how to train people, and how much O&M is being trained on, pistol courses. I think it is on us as the cabal of sergeants major to personalize the message at the company level, not just enforce it, but we have to personalize it. I know the life of A41 is very different than C27 or B110, and we have to take that with the major, right? Me and the company, the company commander need to take that information and personalize it for the unit. Because if the guys on Teams are getting it and it's the 8th time the email's been forwarded and it's like FYSA, spread this to your guys, don't release them for the 4-day until they read this, we have to be taking that in, processing it, and personalizing it. And I would also say that while I agree with the identity crisis, I disagree with the term Indigenous approach. It's just a special forces approach. Working with Indigenous forces is inherent in what we do. And by qualifying our approach in including Indigenous forces, it makes it seem like it's something new. All the stuff we talk about, UW, all the IW, MUTU, whatever it is, includes Indig. So I think just we need to rebrand it the special forces approach and quit qualifying it with Indigenous, because I think the term Indigenous is inherent in what we're doing. But to circle back, consistency, I think, is the critical key to this.
Hey, Dave, I'm going to chime in here real quick on your point there, the Indigenous approach. We aren't the only ones that do the Indigenous approach. There are many other organizations out there that get involved with partner nation forces and work with them. And I mean, so we share that with them. We're not the only ones that do that. So I agree. What makes us unique is not the Indigenous approach, because others do it also.
Yeah, back to the original thing. I think it starts at the individual. What are they tying to the regiment to truly believe what makes it, what makes this regiment or what makes Special Forces unique? And I guess I would throw that back to CSM Smith. Then what is it that makes us unique? And I'll qualify that a little bit, because we're the experts at the Indigenous approach. There's a lot of it, and we're going to see that in the Great Power Cut. There's a lot of redundancy of efforts. There's a lot of people that do the same thing. What separates, what's the value proposition for those entities, and why should they be the instrument of choice for the policymakers? And I think that's as long as we understand our role in that, I think we could help with that. But also another thing I want to bring up is we're doing a lot of internal. What can we do about it? How do we see this crisis? What about external? What are the folks that employ us outside of our entity? Because for a while, for the last couple of years, it seemed like there's been a little bit of what's be considered the soft fatigue. We took we had the big stick for 2 decades, and now we're the conventional forces, the posturing, all those things are catching up. So what is our value proposition going forward? So I don't disagree at all that the Indigenous approach is very, the SF approach, I like the ring of that. But I don't think there's anything wrong with identifying that there is redundancy of effort. We just happen to be better than anyone else, because that's what we recruit, assess, and we train for. I'll pause there for comments.
Hey, Dave, very, very good point. And I'll tell you, as in my travels around many places with General Botel, talking to different combatant commands and country teams, SOCOM can meet about 53% of the overall demand signal around the globe. That's it, 53%. So the SOCOM J3, he's got to figure out where the priorities are and how to allocate resources. But I'll tell you, in personal observations, talking to senior leaders, when a combatant command or a country team requests SOF, the first thing they think of is, I need ODAs and I need Green Berets. That's kind of where they see this is going to be my best shot at success with whatever that country team's project or priorities are. And then it's on the SOCOM J3 to kind of figure out how to kind of work things around and put elements where they are best suited for success. And I think as we kind of move beyond the counter VEO scenarios, I think it'll be more obvious to the SF command on where they're sent and why they're going to a particular region with those inherent skills that SF excels at, like language and cultural awareness.
Hey, great points, Bill. I just double tap on that. I think again, using the C word, consistency of message, I think is absolutely paramount for this. I mean, even if it's like the maybe using the wrong phrase, but the Kachino dolls where you used to stack them all up inside there, and you start pulling them apart. They all nest within one another. We have to be the same way, from the higher headquarters all the way down. We have to have a consistent message. It doesn't have to be the same. It just has to be consistent. What your role is at the ODA isn't going to be the same thing as my role at USASOC headquarters, but it needs to be consistent. It needs to be nested and layered. I think to the point that Bill made, I would just say that messaging both internal and external is extremely important, because there's a lot of people out there in very empowered roles inside the Beltway that are advising people. For us as sergeant majors, do not shy away from engagements, especially things like CODELs when they come down to see you, because I think that consistent message, getting up into our representatives are key. I remember just flying on an airplane with my previous boss from JSOC, and we were kind of figuring out what we were going to do when we landed in DC. And he said, "Hey, I'm going to go do this." And then I said, "Well, hey, I think I'm going to go to the hospital, visit some guys." And he goes, "Hey, I want to go to the hospital, visit some guys too." He goes, "But why don't you come with me into the Pentagon and talk to the policy folks?" He goes, "Do you think the policy people want to hear from me, a 3-star general? No, they would rather hear from you, the E9, the sergeant major that's walking the ground, talking with the troops to help them shape policy that's really going to come down and impact you at a user level, probably more so than the institution level." So those kinds of engagements of getting into the Pentagon, talking with CODELs, talking with representatives that come down, I think are going to be important for for informing people how they should be using or employing or thinking about ways to employ SOF.
Yeah, Jeff, I'll chime in on that one. I think the credibility of the enlisted force, especially the senior enlisted force, can't be overstated here with respect to affecting change. I mean, my experiences have taken me into so many offices I never thought I would ever be in. And then for those so many senior leaders to look to me specifically and say, "Hey, what do you see and what's your opinion?" And then, for all of those deployments, especially with, senior leaders from both state and DOD and right out of the, Pennsylvania Avenue, those folks often pull this aside and say, "What's your perspective here? And what do you think?" And I think as we talk about moving forward, I am at this point in my life, I'm very keen to hear NCOs. Whenever I hear any GO speak, I'm often, listening to where his CSM is, where they're focused, what they're working on. And I think, this panel speaks to the intelligence, the capability, and the intensity level, and the focus behind getting, moving the organization forward. And I think it's extremely important. And then the other piece that's so vital to NCOs that we sometimes overlook is continuity, right? As many senior leaders have told me, if it doesn't pass 2 weeks beyond the time when the colors are exchanged, and it was an experiment, right? And it was just an idea. It wasn't a good idea. It was an idea. If it can make it 2 weeks past, the change of command, then it was a good idea. And I think the criticality of NCOs in that consistent continuity and consistency just can't be overstated. So I think we're all agree on that.
So
Yeah, I would just say, if I could, just one last comment on that. I think do not underestimate the power of the staffer. The staffer is the one, if you look at from a congressional or senatorial standpoint, the staffer is the one that actually does all the work and writes everything, and then presents that up to that decision maker to put his or her stamp on there and say, "Yes, I agree with it." So if you're at these engagements and the staffer comes over and wants to have a conversation with you, that is critical. That is a target rich environment for you getting your word up there. If you think it's tied to that senator or that congressperson, it is probably more so to the staffer.
That's a great point, Jeff. That most folks, when they hear, "Oh, we got a CODEL coming," or somebody, they think, "Oh man, this is going to be like a chore." And I'd say, no, it's an opportunity. It is an opportunity for you at lower levels to inform and influence people to what's really going on. So, the NCOs out there, when they have visitors, that's an opportunity. Don't see it as a chore.
these are all great comments, gentlemen. I really do appreciate it. And I do understand the importance and the need to have consistent messaging and communication from the bottom up, top down, and everything in between, making it easier for people to understand the message. As someone who works in communications, I know how valuable that particular approach is. Going back to something that Sergeant Major Smith said, how does implementing these little classes, these little vignettes saying, "Hey, this is where we are, this is how it was applied, this is our background," where do we introduce that, and what other methods could we have to help address the issue?
I'll jump on that one a little bit. The biggest thing, and it's going to sound kind of the same thing, messaging, but that's kind of where we're at with this, is that, everybody across the board has to understand where we are, where we came from, and where we're going. So as CSM Smith said, I think one of the biggest pieces that we fail at probably across the board is kind of understanding our history, knowing our roots, and realizing that we're not really making that big of a strategic level shift. Right? We're really just getting back to our roots. We actually took a break from that during the past 20 years of conflict, and now we're returning back home pretty much, right? So that lack of understanding of our history, lack of understanding where we came from is part of the reason that we are quick to say that there's such a thing as an identity crisis. And fixing that kind of across the board will assist in that. That starts at all the PME schools that have been mentioned here. It starts with any opportunity we have to interface, especially as senior enlisted advisor roles. So at your company, it starts at a team starting level. It starts at, out at SWIC. It starts in the recruiter's office, and then it starts with your higher level senior leader engagements from across the board. So when you have the opportunity to interface with your battalion commanders, group commanders, the first SFC chain of command, all of those people saying the same things, being on the same message, that's how this identity crisis, if you will, gets resolved. And that's kind of the biggest key to it. And I think, like I said, the fact that we have a lot of guys in our formation right now that don't really understand our history and don't understand why they're here is our biggest problem. We can fix recruiting. That's really easy. We switch up a couple pamphlets and we change up some pictures and we change up some verbiage and we're good there. We fixed it. But we have our kind of middle class of SF guy right now that we have to address and make sure that they understand what it is they signed up for and understand that this is what they're willing to do for the future. And the potential to lose some guys is there because job satisfaction is key. If you don't like what you're doing, then there's, that's fine. It is what it is. Move on and do something else. Especially in this position, in this job, we need guys that are highly motivated, that are into what they like what they're doing and willing to continue to do it. And a lot of that comes from, decentralization and trust and empowering these guys to do what it is that they need to do. It's just making sure that the message is there, they understand what it is they're supposed to be doing.
Yeah, and to Matt's point, I think there's a whole nother resource pool out there that we have the ability to tap into, and that's the guys that are no longer in, right? Whether you call them, I am lucky enough to be able to travel to a lot of special forces chapters and spend time with a lot of leaders. And I got to tell you, this thing that General Brennan's been doing with getting the SFA more connected at the senior levels speaks to the tip of the iceberg with respect to just the sheer amount of capacity that's out there to be mobilized. Whether they are the people who have lived this before and many other transitions, or are just a resource to be able to get the message out there. Our Green Berets who now operate in Indigenous clothing full time, better known as retirees, those folks are recruiting. They're spreading the message. Sometimes the message is very positive, sometimes not so much. But I think this piece of making sure that they are aligned and incorporated with where the organization is headed is incredibly vital. I mean, when I travel, I spend a lot of time answering questions about, whatever they've heard. And I think messaging is extremely important, but also that resource, that experience, we talk about, Tom Smith's, years in, helping the regiment and giving back. And there are hundreds of folks that are out there ready to give back. And we're just not asking them. And I think we've got just an incredible opportunity to bring those folks back, harvest the best out of them, and really make a difference to that force now. And I think, as the NCOs consider solution sets, I think, reaching out locally, because they're near you and they're not far away and they're looking for ways to give back. I think it's just another opportunity for us.
I think one thing that stands out too is, we can do a pretty good job of, our internal messaging. We have to work in getting that out to down to the lowest level. I mean, obviously that's engaged leadership there. And then Terry made a great point about the folks that are no longer necessarily in uniform, can help out. But I think we also have to pay attention to some of the things that, are being said on social media. We, SOF does have a pretty good network of blogosphere folks that are on there that are putting out opinions that aren't necessarily based in fact. And then, some of our folks are on there, reading and just searching, trying to learn, and they may not be armed with the accurate information. So I think, that's another area there where we got to probably figure out how we bring them into the fold of the information flows.
Jacob, I'll chime in here for as far as ways of going about doing it, or maybe tools or something like that. I watched a video one time, a documentary on the SWCS, Navy SEALs. There's Naval Special Warfare's SWCS, and it was a documentary on their SOC-Rs. I'll tell you what, after watching that, I just wanted to get young again and go join the Navy and become a SWCS, a SOC-R guy. I think we can do the same thing in the Special Forces arena. I think we hire the right people, professional people, to come in and do a documentary on Special Forces. Where do we come from? What is our mission? And how do we apply our skill sets to everything else that's out there? And a really, really good documentary, balanced. It needs to be balanced. It shouldn't focus all on one mission set or whatever, but a good balance across the board and so forth. I think that would be very, very helpful. Plus, I think it's be very helpful for recruiting. I think we need to develop classes. I think we ought to come up with mandatory reading lists that apply to our forces and at different levels, at the youngest levels, and maybe perhaps at E6 level, E7 level, E8 level, E9 level, and then above and beyond that, have mandatory reading lists that guys are expected to read and understand and so forth. Leadership ought to have discussions with them about those books and about those classes and things of this nature. But leadership has to sit there, and I think you all agreed, and everything everybody has said pushes the consistency across all three: recruiting, training, and operationalizing the force. But there's four things that I throw out there: documentary, classes, mandatory reading lists, and leadership. Stressing the point.
Yeah. One thing I do want to caveat this too, because these kind of discussions have a tendency to skew to one side or the other. And it just always kind of want to circle back to the fact that no matter what we do and where we go, and where we think we need to be, SF guys are always going to be SF guys. And we cannot take away the fact that, that tactical level responsibility, training, competency is key to our success in the future. So we can't forget that, the E6 level task, E7 level task on a team still must exist. And none of those things don't change. Their abilities don't change, the time on the range, all that stuff doesn't change. And I think one thing that we have it, you always have a tendency to overcorrect, and there's a potential here to overcorrect and take this outside of the realm of competent, combat focused, combat oriented SF guy to, this guy that's focused on strategic level policy, but forgot how to go down to and train the indigenous forces and train the guys on the ground and live in the jungle and do the things that SF guys need to be capable of doing. And so that has to be balanced and tailored so that we don't over message the fact that we're focusing on strategic level global power competition and forget that we are supposed to be the most tactically competent fighting force that exists.
Yeah, Matt, I think that the trick is taking all that tactical and technical proficiency and doing what Green Berets do on the ground at the ODA level and just tying that to the new focus. I think we have to maintain that small unit focus, the decentralized decision making from that E8 and that O3. It's just, instead of tying it to an HVI list, we just tie those missions to the other strategic plans, the CSP or the CSO, whatever that particular TSOC is using. But the core of our success will be the fact that our guys are going to go into country and they're going to train the host nation partner to the highest level possible. And that starts with our guys being trained to the highest possible level.
Yeah, no, I agree. And that's, now that you mentioned that, kind of like when you bring up the, team leader, team sergeant and their roles and responsibilities and capabilities, right? One thing that's gotten lost, I think, as of late, and I think it's because of the intense focus on strict combat, is the capability of one Special Forces ODA and what it is that they're capable of doing in a strategic realm, if they are trusted and empowered to do so. So one thing that's kind of, I think, dissolved is that O3 E8 level command their responsibility level, what it is they should be capable of doing, the strategic effects that they do have once they are trusted and empowered to do so. And that's I think has a lot to do with what we are going to consider, what we're considering this identity crisis. Where do we lose that? Why did we lose it? And how do we get it back? We have to have empowered leadership at all levels to really be, successful, right? And that's kind of gone away. We now have it. I've seen personally now. It seems company commanders, company sergeant majors are teetering on the empowerment that E8s and O3s should have had, right? And it's all kind of moving up an echelon, if you will. And I think that's kind of one of the biggest downsides right now.
Yeah, Matt, I'll jump on that one too, man. That's definitely a subject that hits my heart, man. Because one of the reasons I left was just that, right? It was the degradation of the ability for ODAs to be ODAs, right? And this gets to things that alarm me. How many of our own we eat, and then the ability for teams to be able to to deal with retraining and solve problems on their own, and then give the autonomous authorities. One of the best assignments I ever had was to go to the Joseph in the Philippines and be able to see first group guys in the middle of the war just really doing ODA stuff unilaterally in the jungle, living in thatch huts, making it happen, and to see that and see the level of autonomy those guys were able to work at was really just re-energized me to see that. And then you come back to Fort Bragg and you watch and you just get frustrated as a senior leader when you see how much gets pulled to some level for inspection, or as I was on the phone with a retired colonel the other day, for adult supervision, and how we act is extremely important. If we say the ODA is the center of gravity, one, we've got to select the right people to be in those seats, and two, we have to empower them and trust them, and then give them the latitude to work. And when they fail, figure out the right response to that, and not have systematic knee-jerk reactions. And man, I'm telling you, that is something that strikes me in a real chord with me, because I see it, and I also have discussions with leaders who lose their trust in senior leaders because they see there's evidence of depending on where you are in the echelon, how you're treated differently. And I think that's something that's got to be addressed and eradicated. And again, I think it's a matter of what we want to get done there, but it's extremely important.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that, CSM. And I think that's the biggest key is, we say we focus on mission command, but we don't really empower our folks, through mission command with, by actually allowing them to do it. We talk about, you have your intent, your understanding, and your trust, but we really don't actually do that anymore. I think that's one reason that we start to lose guys a lot. And I think fixing this thing and fixing this identity crisis, that's one of the key aspects of doing it. Is really empowering guys to do what it is that they think that they're here to do. And if we can strategically message our end state, message our mission, empower and trust our guys to go accomplish those mission sets, and then hold them accountable and hold everybody held accountable to a set standard for when they fail to do so, then we have an organization that's set up and established to run freely, be successful, and do great things. One of the hardest things that we have to do as senior leaders is make sure that guys understand that, hey, you earned your Green Beret, when you graduated the Q course, but you got to maintain it every single day. And if you cannot do that, then you don't deserve to be here. And that's just a sad fact that we have to deal with, but it's part of the deal. And that, so along with trust and along with empowerment has to come standard and has to come accountability as well. And that's, those things have to go hand in hand.
Yeah, I agree. I think it speaks of consistency, right? One of the things I heard Ed Croot talk about recently was we started doing exit interviews with guys who were leaving, guys and gals who were leaving the formation. My mind about 50 years behind schedule, but I think that's fantastic. I think it's going to reveal a lot to us about why folks are leaving. And we talk about why people stay in organizations, and I work in a space where I help organizations get better, and every one of those, when I find any organization that has a lot of attrition, I can almost without fail map it back to leadership. You can incentivize coming to any organization, and in our business where people vote with their feet, they vote because they've been disenchanted, and that disenchantment comes from leaders. And I think this piece of what you're talking about now is arguably one of the most vital pieces that, this piece of addressing the crisis, if you will, that we could take on. And I think it's just super, super important. And I see, unbelievably positive things. I see Jim Rooney working at HPW. I mean, here you got a bona fide team sergeant who's sitting at the CG's table, and he's speaking, from a team sergeant perspective on any given day. And man, those things are just, I mean, they're right. And I think it's just powerful to see that. And so I think this piece of getting after it is so vital. And for the company sergeant majors and battalion CSMs on this call, man, your voice and what you have lived through, your future use notebook, now's the time to break that thing out and look at those points you made as an E7 and an E8 and put those things into place, and then fight for that ability to give that empowerment back down, and then play by those adult rules of, hey, look, if you shouldn't be wearing a beret, it shouldn't have a tab, then the system's set up to get rid of that for you. But if you are, we're going to give you a lot of latitude. We're going to give you strategic capacity, and we mean it. And I think that's just the right approach. And I think it's great to hear that come out in this discussion.
Yeah, Terry, if I'll kind of follow that, because it's good points about autonomy and empowerment, and that's where I think SF and the soft community, as a whole, can do a better job of kind of putting people out in a broader capacity to kind of highlight that and influence. So, how many times I heard a team guy say, when are the generals going to let us do what we do best? And so, when someone's ready to go be that general's senior enlisted leader and kind of help them understand what SF and SOF do. And that's important. I think the officers do a pretty good job of kind of moving folks around and putting them in key positions. And I think the NCOs could do a better job of that. And that's, that'll be a tough sell, because we like where we're at and we want that, retainability. But ultimately, there's got to be a more holistic plan on when we put senior NCOs in a broader perspective to influence and shape what's going on out there in the joint force.
Hey, Jacob, let me chime in here for just a second. And I've said this for many, many years. What was really unfortunate was when USOCOM got stood up. And I'm not sure we understood the importance of education back then. Or I think the mission would have been, you will be responsible for training, educating, organizing, and equipping the SOF force. When I came to USOCOM, my very first thing I did was 3 days after getting here, I went straight to the Keystone course. It was the first 2-week Keystone course, and was really that experience that told me that our education for the SOF force was what I thought was absolutely broke. Not that the Keystone course was bad, it was a good course. It was good for what it was designed to do and so forth. But having gone through that course now with all of those other senior enlisted leaders from all the services joint across the board, all of them at the division level and higher, it amazed me at the lack of experience and the lack of knowledge they had on certain topics that I thought were absolutely critical for the SOF community to have. And I realized that they are a product of the services education processes. And again, I don't knock the services education. It's perfectly fine for them. I just felt it was different for us, and we needed a different go around. So that's why I basically came back from the Keystone course, sat down and gave it an awful lot of thought, sat down with General Brown at the time, and basically that's where we started the pursuit of developing JSOFC. I specifically selected the E9 group, not because I wanted to get us out of USASMA, which some people claim. And so it's because I thought that the E9s had the most influence in the military, in my mind. The E9s have the most influence. All the young troops want to be just like their command sergeant major or their sergeant major. And all officers that I know of have a great deal of respect for sergeant majors out there throughout the service. And that's why I wanted to focus on the E9 for the education piece, is to start working that, educating the force and providing them the education that they need. And I'll tell you, and I'm very, very happy to have stood up the Summit course and teaching it now for 8 years. We just graduated Summit 16 here two Thursdays, last week, Thursday. I am always amazed how much our senior SOF enlisted know, but that they don't necessarily understand. And the Summit course brings that out. We put all of the material in a fashion that they then can see the whole global picture or the strategic picture. Now they start connecting all the dots. So they knew about all the dots. They just didn't connect them all. And so I think that the education is what is so critically missing right now through the entire pipeline of special operations. That's why we have so many people that do not understand, clearly understand, consistently understand our identity, what we are, how we fit in, and what our potential is. And so I think education is so doggone important. And that's why I bring up education, guys.
Hey, Tom, great comments. And while you were talking about that, I think it kind of brought to me anyway, the power of this type of discussion going on right now. When I look out at the view screen here, all the different levels of expertise and leadership throughout our community, current and past, I think it's important that we continue to have this, because I think this kind of discussion is healthy. I think this kind of introspection is awesome, and it's probably needed more often than we currently do right now. I go back to the days of the AARs, after doing some type of exercise, and you get together as a tactical element, you just wire brush one another, and you find something that was wrong, you rake it over the coals, you talk about what happened, and you talk about how to fix it, and it goes in. Back into the planning process and the training process, and that evolution comes out, you grow and learn from it. And I think that's the only concern I have about this is how it is kind of gets viewed from outside our organization. I mean, because people don't understand, this is kind of our process of making ourselves better, iron sharpens iron kind of thing. They may say, well, hey, you guys have that identity crisis thing going on. Have you fixed it yet? Have you, are you back capable again? And I don't think that's ever been the problem. I don't think there's ever been anyone saying that we're not capable of doing what we're doing, but this is a process of making ourselves better. It's coming at a tipping point or an inflection point where, hey, we're moving from one period to another period, and it gives us a chance to kind of do some introspection to see how we're set up to go through those new challenges. So really, again, as a guy that sets up in the bleachers watching the game being played right now, and seeing you guys getting after it, I have all the faith and confidence in SOF like I've never had before. Just by over the past few months seeing this evolve. So thanks for allowing me to be part of it, and to allow me to pull in a lot more information, so that as I go about do my normal job of talking about human performance, talking about the comprehensive review and some of the outtakes with the groups and stuff, you guys have given me a lot to think about and a lot to articulate. And I appreciate that very much.
Thank you very much for that, sir. I'm going to actually throw this out there for everyone else. Do you guys have anything else you would like to add?
Hey, Jacob, just one thing. First, I'd just like to thank Ed Croot for his work that brought us to this point. Ed, as a guy who I've known for quite some time, just brilliant in application, and the fact that, he wrote something so strong that's really getting all of our attention, forcing these kinds of conversations. One, kudos to Ed for the effort as he went through this. And then I think, the courage of the senior leadership to bring this to bear and really open this up and understand that, there's a lot of perceptions that are out there, and, we're all going to have different ideas about how we label this and what we recommend. But it speaks volumes to any organization that's willing to be this vulnerable to just get out there and really explore the way ahead and empower folks to get it done. So I think, give credit where credit's due. We're all here because senior leaders said, hey, let's take this on and let's make it work and let's make it better. And I think the fact that, this undertaking is occurring is just extraordinary. And I'm excited to be part of it. I think it's just fantastic.
Yeah, Terry, good points. And just like as Jeff said, I think I certainly took more from our sessions than I contributed, but a happy observer, and will do whatever I can to help going forward. And Terry, as you said, Ed Croot did a really important research there in his fellowship. And, he likes to remind me, this identity crisis, it's not his belief, it's what the research bore out. And so I think it's important to note that, this isn't just Ed Croot's philosophy here. This is a lot of good research that said, hey, we need to do some introspection, as Jeff Wright pointed out. So, Jacob, thanks for hosting us, and really a real pleasure to be a part of the panel. Thank you.
Yeah, Jacob, I'll chime in here. I can't tell you how honored I am to be part of this little group here and stuff like that. Having the 3 active duty sergeants major there. Great work on y'all's part. Great input, feedback. I hope to see all 3 of you in the summit course one of these days, not too terribly long from now. As soon as you become an 06 Command Senior Enlisted Leader, come on, I'm ready for you. I'll be happy to help you learn. So, and to the other 3, my fellow guys there, Terry, Bill, and Jeff, it's always great to see you. It's always great to work with you. And it's been my pleasure and my honor to have known you and worked with each and every one of you. Terry, stay out of trouble.
I'll do my best, CSM. I'll do my best.
Yeah, same here. Again, absolute honor to be here, especially with the panel that we have here, with 4 retired CSMs who I've had the pleasure to work for, at least a couple of them, and look up to, and just kind of share this open discussion. I think it's been an amazing opportunity. I've learned a ton, and an honor and a privilege to be here. And I just wanted to echo what CSM Peter said. It speaks volumes to the current climate of first SFC that they're willing to come out here and let this happen. It's extremely easy to hide behind who you're supposed to be and just maintain the status quo. It takes a lot of courage to kind of stand up and say, who am I really? Where am I? And how do I need to get to where I need to be successful? And that's something that's happening within the regiment right now, and it's only going to make us better.
Yeah, I'm pretty honored to be here. I was kind of that Peter Pan guy in SF. I never wanted to grow up, but at some point, you have to, right? I'm just a testament to when the regiment gets bigger and you don't die of natural causes, you wind up getting promoted. That's kind of how I got here. But I mean, at the end of the day, I really and truly do appreciate the opportunity to be a part of this. And I think, frankly, we do have a bit of an identity crisis. And frankly, we do need to fix it. But to go all the way back to CSM Smith's history lesson, part of who we are is constant adaptation, flexibility, and improving. And we're part of an organization that should always be striving to improve, whether or not it's ordering a sniper rifle or shifting our focus from VEOs to great power competition. And I think collectively, we need to accept it and we need to get over it. And we just simply need to fix it so our force of the future is as effective and revered as our force of the present and our forces of the past. And that's just who we are. And I think it's our job as the sergeants major, both active and retired, to sponsor that change.
Hey, CSM Rice, CSM Smith, CSM Thetford, CSM Peters, you guys are larger than life. So to be honest with you, it's pretty intimidating getting onto this panel. And I'll tell you right now, with Dave and Matt, I mean, you guys went blows to blows with these guys. I will tell you though, to Matt's point, the leadership has attacked this problem. It's inspiring that they had the courage to bring it up and hey, let's get after it. And now it's up to us to live it. We're not going to be able to go back to, from now on, all of our operational environments are going to have all kinds of stakeholders and folks with equities. We're going to have 7 or 8 bosses. We have to earn trust down to the individual level with every single interaction. And that's what every youngster here, whether they walk across the street to the shop at or they finish the 20-mile long walk, they're going to do it the best they possibly can. They're going to represent all of us. So I sincerely appreciate the opportunity to be on this thing. This is awesome, and onward we go.
I would like to thank all of you for joining me for this podcast. It has been an amazing experience, and nothing is more humbling than hearing senior leaders you've known about since you joined SOF to actually sit down and talk candidly about something that they are very passionate about. So I definitely appreciate it, and I hope everyone else appreciates it as well. Thank you all for listening. This has been the Indigenous Approach. We hope you have enjoyed this episode. Follow us on social media, and if you have suggestions for topics or guests, send us a message. Thank you for listening.